This isn't just a story about Brad Pitt finding love again. It's a story about what happens after the collapse, after the courtroom battles, after the public judgment, after silence replaces headlines. Hollywood calls this a comeback. Fans call it healing. The media calls it a fresh start. But new love doesn't arrive in a vacuum. It arrives carrying everything that was never resolved. For Brad Pitt, love has never been simple. Charm masked emotional distance. Chemistry replaced communication. Intensity stood in for stability. And when relationships ended, they didn't just end, they imploded. So when news of a new relationship surfaced, the question wasn't who she was. The question was deeper. Has anything actually changed? Because when the same emotional ending keeps repeating, even with different partners, different phases of life, different intentions, it's never about bad luck. It's about an unresolved pattern asking for one more chance to be seen. Before the new relationship began, Brad Pitt wasn't looking for love. He was recovering from exposure. Years of legal battles, public narratives he couldn't control, a reputation rewritten in real time. For the first time in his career, charm wasn't enough to soften the story. Silence became survival. And in that silence, something shifted. Brad Pitt had spent decades being admired, but rarely examined. Now, everything was under a microscope. Mistakes, emotional blind spots, patterns that were once dismissed as Hollywood drama suddenly carried weight. This wasn't just a fall from grace, it was a forced pause, a moment where distractions stopped working and self-reflection became unavoidable. By the time love re-entered his life, Brad wasn't chasing intensity. He was seeking regulation, stability over excitement, consistency over chemistry, peace over performance. And that shift changes the meaning of a relationship, because when love arrives after collapse, it's no longer about feeling chosen, it's about learning how to stay. Even after everything collapsed, some patterns didn't disappear. They simply went quiet. Brad Pitt has always been drawn to relationships that begin gently, without pressure, without urgency, without confrontation. At first, this feels like maturity. No chaos, no intensity, no emotional volatility. But calm can also be avoidance, because difficult conversations don't disappear when they're delayed. They accumulate. Brad's pattern has never been about explosive conflict. It's about emotional distance slowly replacing connection. Charm fills the early space, understanding fills the middle, silence enters quietly at the end. Not because love fades, but because emotional accountability never fully arrives. In the past, intensity masked this distance. Now, calm does. And that's what makes this moment different and dangerous. Because when a familiar pattern wears a healthier disguise, it's harder to recognize. And repetition doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks peaceful, until it isn't. Every relationship reaches a moment where comfort is no longer enough. It doesn't arrive as conflict, it arrives as a question. A conversation about time, about priorities, about what comes next. For Brad Pitt, this is where the past usually returns. Not loudly, not aggressively, but internally. Because new love may feel calm, but calm still needs structure. And structure asks for emotional presence when things stop being easy. This is the moment where charm can no longer carry the weight, where being agreeable is no longer sufficient, where listening must turn into engagement. In Brad's past relationships, this was the turning point. Not the fight, not the scandal, the quiet realization that something essential wasn't being met. And here's the uncomfortable truth. Growth isn't proven when things are peaceful. It's revealed when love starts asking for depth. This new relationship won't be tested by drama. It will be tested by consistency, by whether emotional availability shows up not just when it's convenient, but when it's required. Because love after the storm doesn't need intensity, it needs endurance. Self-sabotage rarely looks dramatic. It doesn't show up as chaos or destruction. It shows up as distance, disguised as calm. For Brad Pitt, the old defenses didn't return loudly. They returned politely. Through avoidance of difficult conversations, through postponing emotional clarity, through staying agreeable instead of being honest. This is how self-sabotage survives maturity, not by creating conflict, but by delaying truth. Because truth creates friction, and friction threatens the fragile peace that feels like healing. In past relationships, intensity exploded everything. Now, restraint risks dissolving connection slowly, and both lead to the same outcome: distance. The difference is that this time, distance feels justified. After everything Brad has been through, withdrawal can look like self-care. Boundaries can look like walls. Silence can look like wisdom. But healing that avoids engagement is just avoidance with better language. Growth isn't measured by how calm we appear. It's measured by how present we remain when love becomes uncomfortable. And that's the moment old patterns wait for. When patterns aren't confronted, they don't disappear. They repeat. With better intentions, better language, and higher stakes. If nothing truly changes beneath the surface, new love slowly inherits old consequences. Conversations stay polite. Discomfort gets postponed. Connection remains functional, but not transformative. Over time, something subtle happens. The relationship doesn't break, it thins. Moments lose weight. Silence becomes familiar. Emotional presence becomes optional. And because there's no explosion, there's no obvious reason to stop. That's how repetition survives adulthood. Not through chaos, but through quiet erosion. For someone like Brad Pitt, this aftermath feels deceptively safe. No scandals, no public collapse, no visible damage. But safety without depth eventually becomes emptiness, and emptiness doesn't announce itself. It settles in. Until one day the same ending arrives, not as tragedy, but as inevitability. Love karma isn't punishment. It's repetition. Not because we're unlucky, but because we haven't learned yet. Every relationship hands us the same lesson, just wrapped in a different face, a different story, a different moment in life. For Brad Pitt, the question was never whether love would return. It always does. The real question is whether presence will arrive with it. Because karma doesn't end when we find a healthier partner. It ends when we show up differently, when we stay during discomfort, when we speak before distance forms, when vulnerability replaces control. If this love becomes another chapter of silence, then the story will repeat again, quietly. But if this time Brad chooses engagement over retreat, truth over harmony, and depth over safety, then this isn't just a new relationship, it's the end of a cycle. And that's the real transformation karma has been waiting for.